Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we try and cut through some of the noise and get you right to the heart of history's toughest cold cases.
Absolutely.
And today, wow, we are opening a file that's just, it's been tangled up for over 5 centuries. We're talking political feuds, propaganda, lost evidence.
That's the big one. The princes in the tower.
Exactly. Edward V, just 12, and his little brother Richard, Duke of York, only 9, vanished in 1483.
And the core mystery, it hasn't really shifted since that summer. It's not just if they were murdered, though that's part of it. The real fight is over who gave the order.
Was it Richard III, the classic villain? Or maybe Henry VII, the guy who ultimately won? Or someone else entirely?
And it's all wrapped up in, well, centuries of spin, frankly. Propaganda, maybe even anti-Semitism in some theories, religious cults, political convenience. It's a mess.
So our mission today, our deep dive, is to try and untangle some of that. We're looking at the sources. What do they actually say?
We've got quite a range. There are contemporary accounts like Dominic Mancini, an Italian who was actually in London right when it all went down. That's crucial.
Okay.
Then you've got the big one, Sir Thomas More's account. Famous, hugely influential, but written decades later under the Tudors, so, problematic.
Right, we have to handle that one carefully.
Definitely. And we're also looking at modern takes, revisionist theories like Josephine Tey's famous novel, though that's fiction, but also serious historical reevaluations. Plus, these recent claims about new documents.
Ah, yes, the archival finds, we'll get into those, and the forensic evidence, or rather the lack of it, or the refusal to test it, that's a whole saga in itself.
It really is.
But the hook, the thing that grabs you immediately and hasn't let go for 540 years, it's just that they vanished, poof, gone.
Exactly. That single fact fuels everything else.
Yeah.
Murder was suspected almost right away. Our sources confirm that. But with no bodies.
Yeah.
Well, how could anyone be sure?
And that uncertainty is key, isn't it? Because if they died in 1483, Richard III looks, well, pretty guilty. But if they survived past 1485...
Then Henry VII suddenly has a massive motive. So the timeline is everything.
Okay, let's rewind. Set the stage. 1483. What's the world they're living in?
Chaos, basically. You absolutely cannot understand 1483 without grasping the brutality of the decades before it. The Wars of the Roses weren't polite disagreements.
No, this was decades of the Plantagenet family tearing itself apart. House of York, the White Rose, against the House of Lancaster, the Red Rose. Power grabs, betrayals, battles.
And murder, let's be blunt. Royal murder was, sadly, almost becoming a tool of statecraft by this point, an expected, if usually unspoken, part of securing the throne.
You only need to look back 12 years, right? 1471. Edward V, the prince's own father, almost certainly ordered the killing of the Lancastrian king, Henry VI.
Right, in the Tower. After Henry's son and heir had already been killed in battle at Tewkesbury, it was ruthless elimination of the rival line.
Some sources even suggest Richard, Duke of Gloucester, our future Richard III, might have been involved in Henry VI's death, or at least present. It shows the environment.
Absolutely. So the peace under Edward IV, it was always fragile, built on victory, yes, but the tensions were simmering. Then, boom, April 1483, Edward IV dies suddenly. He's only 41.
Possibly pneumonia, maybe typhoid. The sources aren't totally clear, but it was unexpected.
Very unexpected, and it leaves this massive power vacuum. His heir, Edward V, is just a boy, 12 years old.
And that's the trigger. Edward V's will, perhaps fatally, names his youngest brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as Lord Protector.
Now, protector sounds protective, right, but it wasn't just being a guardian. The Lord Protector held the real reins of government until the king came of age. It gave Richard immense legal authority.
Authority he used immediately. He was up north when Edward died.
Yes, he races south. His goal is to intercept young Edward V, who's traveling to London for his coronation. Edward is with his mother's family, the Woodvilles.
And Richard hated the Woodvilles, saw them as upstarts, rivals for influence over the young king, especially the Queen's brother, Earl Rivers.
Precisely. So Richard doesn't wait. He meets the king's party at Stony Stratford. And instead of joining them respectfully, he arrests Earl Rivers, the king's uncle, and Lord Richard Grey, the king's half-brother.
Sends them north under guard. They're later executed. No trial.
It's a shocking power play. Right there, he's showing his hand. This isn't just about protecting the king. It's about controlling everything. He's sidelining anyone who might oppose him.
And then he takes charge of Edward V himself.
Escorts him to London. And where does he lodge him? The Tower of London.
Now, the Tower wasn't just a prison then, was it? It was also a royal palace. Kings often stayed there before their coronation.
Correct. So ostensibly, it's for the king's safety and preparation. The coronation is set for June 22nd, but then Richard ups the pressure.
He needs the younger brother, too, Richard, Duke of York. He's only 9.
The Queen, Elizabeth Woodville, had panicked when Rivers was arrested. She fled into sanctuary at Westminster Abbey with young Richard and her daughters. Richard sends the Archbishop, basically, to persuade her to release the boy.
Claims he needs his brother's companionship in the Tower for the coronation preparations.
She reluctantly agrees. Probably felt she had no choice. So now, Richard has both princes together in the Tower, under his complete control.
Game over, almost. What happens next?
The coronation date, June 22nd, it gets postponed indefinitely.
Convenient. That buys some time.
Time for the next crucial step, making the boys illegitimate. He needs a legal justification for taking the throne himself.
It's the titulus regis part, right? The claim about Edward V's marriage.
Exactly. Richard's allies, probably orchestrated by him, bring forward this story that Edward V had been previously contracted to marry someone else, Lady Eleanor Butler, before he married Elizabeth Woodville.
And under church law back then, a pre-contract was like a marriage. It was binding.
Essentially, yes. If Edward V was already bound to Lady Eleanor, his later marriage ceremony with Elizabeth Woodville was invalid. Bigamous, in effect.
Which means
all the children of Edward and Elizabeth, including Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, were illegitimate bastards with no claim to the throne.
Wow, that's audacious. Did people buy it? Lady Eleanor was already dead by then, wasn't she?
She was. It relied on the testimony of a clergyman, Bishop Stellington, who claimed knowledge of the pre-contract. It was politically convenient, let's put it that way. Parliament accepted it, formally declared Richard the rightful king in this act called titulus regis.
The king's title.
Right. Richard III is crowned king on July 6th, 1483.
And the boys. What's happening to them during all this political maneuvering?
That's where it gets truly dark. We have accounts, like Mancini's, saying they were seen playing in the Tower Garden, maybe shooting bows and arrows, up until around mid-June.
Just kids being kids while their world is collapsing.
Exactly. But after the coronation was postponed, after Richard really started consolidating power, they were seen less and less, moved into the inner parts of the Tower.
And then?
They just stopped appearing. The last sighting is around that mid-June mark. After Richard's coronation in July, silence. They vanished from public view entirely.
So Richard III, he's king, the boys are gone, he has to be the prime suspect, historically speaking.
Overwhelmingly, yes. Look at the classic triad. Motive means opportunity. Richard ticks every box.
The motive seems crystal clear. Security. Even if titulus regis made them legally illegitimate.
In the eyes of many loyal Yorkists, and certainly any remaining Lancastrians looking to stir trouble, those boys were still Edward V's sons, the rightful heirs. They were a living, breathing threat to Richard's reign.
And a threat to his own son's succession, right? Edward of Middleham. Richard needed the path clear for him.
Absolutely. As long as the princes lived, Richard's throne and his dynasty were insecure.
Okay, motive. Strong. What about means and opportunity?
He had total control. He's the king. The Tower of London is his fortress, his palace. He appoints the key officers like Sir Robert Brackenbury, the lieutenant of the Tower. The boys are inside the most secure building in England, and Richard holds the keys.
Getting access wouldn't have been hard for someone acting on his orders.
It would have been trivially easy. A trusted agent, maybe just 1 or 2 people, could have been admitted to their chambers at any time, day or night, on the king's authority. Opportunity was constant. Means were absolute.
And crucially, suspicion wasn't just cooked up later by the Tudors. You mentioned Dominic Mancini.
Yes, the Italian envoy. He was in London from spring 1483 until July, right after Richard's coronation. He wrote his report almost immediately after leaving England, before Richard fell, before Henry VII was even in the picture. That makes it incredibly valuable.
And what did Mancini report about the princes?
He confirms they were seen less and less. That after Richard executed Lord Hastings, a key loyalist to Edward V's children, the boys' attendants were dismissed. They were moved deeper into the Tower.
Okay.
And then comes the chilling part. Mancini spoke to their physician, a man named John Argentine, who apparently still had some access. Argentine told Mancini that young Edward V seemed to understand his fate.
How?
He reported that the boy king, like a victim prepared for sacrifice, was seeking daily confession and penance because, in Mancini's words quoting Argentine, he believed that death was facing him.
Oh, that's heartbreaking, a 12-year-old thinking that.
It's horrifying, and Mancini explicitly states, even back then in the summer of 1483, already there is a suspicion that he, Edward V, had been done away with. So the murder theory starts immediately.
Right. Not Tudor spin decades later.
Not at all. It was contemporary suspicion among the elites in London, which makes Richard's next move, or rather his lack of action, so baffling and ultimately such a huge political blunder.
You mean his silence? The fact that he never produced the boys, dead or alive?
Exactly. If they had died of natural causes, say illness or even grief plausible for children under that stress, Richard should have announced it.
Publicly. Right. Bring in witnesses, have a state funeral, show everyone they were gone. That would have been the smart political move, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Standard practice, you display the bodies, you mourn publicly, you transfer loyalty to the new regime, it quashes rumors, prevents pretenders from cropping up later. Think about Edward II or Richard II. Their deaths were announced, bodies displayed, even if the cause of death was suspicious.
But Richard did nothing. He just let them vanish into thin air.
And that silence was, as historians say, deafening. It guaranteed rumors would fly. It directly fueled rebellion, like the big one led by his former ally, the Duke of Buckingham, in October 1483. People were asking, where are the boys? His silence implied guilt.
So why? Why disappear them? If he was ruthless enough to order their deaths, why not just follow the usual playbook for disposing of rivals? Why the secrecy?
This is where we get into the fascinating, slightly spooky territory of medieval belief. Richard wasn't just dealing with political rivals. He was potentially dealing with future saints.
You mean like Henry VI, the king his own brother Edward IV had probably killed?
Precisely. Henry VI, despite being seen as a weak king in life, was incredibly popular in death. People saw him as innocent, pious, wronged. Miracles were reported at his tomb. He developed a powerful cult following, especially among Lancastrian sympathizers. It was a real political headache for the Yorkists.
So Richard feared the same thing happening with the princes, that they'd become martyrs.
Even more so. Think about it. 2 innocent children stolen from the throne, murdered in secret. They were perfect candidates for sainthood in the popular imagination. Far more sympathetic, potentially, than even Henry VI.
A cult of innocent child martyrs. That could be incredibly powerful, a rallying point for opposition.
Exactly. A public funeral, a marked grave, that tomb could instantly become a shrine, a focus for dissent, far more dangerous than just rumors. We even know Richard was concerned about Henry VI's cult because in 1484, he actually had Henry's body moved from Chertsey Abbey to Windsor Castle.
Trying to control it, bring it under royal supervision.
It seems likely. So the theory goes, Richard's decision to make the princes disappear, to leave no trace, no grave, no relics, might have been a calculated attempt to prevent exactly that. To deny them martyrdom, to stop a powerful popular cult before it could even start.
A strategy rooted in the religious beliefs of the time.
Yes, but a strategy that backfired spectacularly in political terms. The mystery proved far more corrosive to his reign than a public, albeit tragic, announcement might have been.
And that mystery, that silence, created the perfect opening for the narrative that would dominate history, the Tudor narrative. Which brings us to Sir Thomas More.
More. His history of King Richard III, written maybe 30 years after the events, between about 1513 and 1518, published even later. This is the source of the classic story.
The one everyone knows, probably thanks to Shakespeare adapting it.
Absolutely. More gives us the full lurid picture. Richard III, twisted in body and soul, consumed by ambition, he directly fingers Richard as the mastermind.
And he names the alleged killer, right? Sir James Tyrrell.
Yes. More claims Richard first asked Brackenbury, the Tower lieutenant, to do it, but Brackenbury refused. So Richard turned to Tyrrell, an ambitious knight in his service.
And More provides the gruesome details.
He does. Tyrrell, supposedly bringing in 2 hired thugs, Miles Forrest, described as a known ruffian, and John Dighton, Tyrrell's horsekeeper, goes to the prince's chamber late at night, while the boys are sleeping.
They smother them with a feather bed and pillows, press down until they suffocate.
It's a horrific, vivid image, and Moore's account includes details like Tyrrell ordering the bodies buried secretly at the foot of a staircase. Then later, Richard supposedly getting nervous and having a priest rebury them in a secret, more consecrated spot.
That sounds very convenient. The reburial part makes finding them impossible.
Extremely convenient for the Tudors, who never managed to produce the bodies. Look, Moore's work is powerful literature. It shaped Shakespeare's play, which shaped popular perception for centuries. But as history, we have to be incredibly careful.
Why? What are the main problems with Moore's account?
Well, first, timing and perspective. Moore was only about 5 years old in 1483. He's writing decades later under Henry VIII, the son of the man who defeated Richard III. His primary source seems to have been John Morton.
Archbishop Morton. Richard III's sworn enemy.
The very same. Morton hated Richard, fled England, and became a key advisor to Henry VII. So More's information is coming through a deeply biased filter.
Okay, bias is a big issue. What else?
It's clearly written as a moral drama, a polemic against tyranny, not a neutral historical account. It contains known errors like getting names wrong, and he often uses phrases like "as men say" or "it is reported," signaling that he's relying on rumor and gossip, not first-hand knowledge.
So it's powerful storytelling, but maybe not reliable fact?
That's the consensus, yes. It served the Tudor dynasty's interests perfectly by painting Richard as an absolute monster, thereby legitimizing Henry VII's seat to the throne. Useful propaganda often sticks.
The key piece of evidence that seems to prop up More's story, though, is the supposed confession of Sir James Tyrrell.
Right. Tyrrell is a fascinating figure. He served Edward IV, then Richard III loyally, and then Henry VII, a survivor. But in 1502, he gets caught up in treason.
But not treason related to the princes?
No, completely unrelated. He was accused of supporting Edmund de la Pole, another Yorkist claimant, the nephew of Edward IV and Richard III. Tyrrell is arrested, tried, and executed for this in May 1502.
And the confession to murdering the princes supposedly happens then, while he's awaiting execution.
That's the story, as reported later. Again, not in any immediate official record. The timing is incredibly suspicious, though.
How so? What was happening in 1502?
A major crisis for Henry VII. His eldest son and heir, Prince Arthur, had just died unexpectedly in April 1502 after marrying Catherine of Aragon. Henry's dynasty suddenly looked fragile. He needed to secure the succession for his younger son, Henry, the future Henry VIII.
And he needed to reassure his powerful Spanish allies, Ferdinand and Isabella, Catherine's parents.
Exactly. The Spanish were nervous about rival claimants. So suddenly, in May 1502, Tyrrell supposedly confesses to having killed the princes 19 years earlier, neatly eliminating the primary Yorkist heirs from the picture, at least narrative-wise. It shores up the Tudor claim at a moment of vulnerability.
It does seem incredibly convenient. Tyrrell is executed for supporting de la Pole, but the confession about the princes comes out at the same time.
And think about this. If Henry VII really had a confession from the man who murdered Edward V, the rightful king, wouldn't he have made enormous political capital out of it?
You'd expect a huge public announcement, maybe even cite it in Tyrrell's treason indictment. Use it to fully blacken Richard's name officially.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But Henry VII never did. There was no public proclamation to Parliament based on Tyrrell's confession. Sir Francis Bacon, writing much later, even hinted it was a story the king gave out, suggesting it was managed news.
And Tyrrell himself, did he mention it at his execution?
No record of it. He was executed for the de la Pole affair. The murder confession remains shadowy, reported second or third hand, serving a clear political purpose for Henry VIII at a critical time. And as we noted, More's version has Tyrrell claiming the bodies were moved to an unknown place again, very convenient for the Tudors.
So if we discount the Tyrrell confession as likely Tudor propaganda and view More's account critically, it throws the spotlight back onto other possibilities, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the biggest beneficiary of the prince's disappearance, especially if they lived past 1485, was Henry VII himself.
His claim to the throne was shaky at best, right? Through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, from a line that had even been barred from the succession earlier.
Very shaky. His legitimacy rested almost entirely on conquest, winning the Battle of Bosworth, and his marriage to Elizabeth of York, the prince's eldest sister. Her claim was strong, but only if her brothers were definitely gone.
So if those boys were still alive somewhere after Richard III died at Bosworth, Henry Tudor had arguably the strongest motive of anyone to quietly make them disappear for good.
It's a compelling argument. And Henry's actions, or lack thereof, after taking the throne, are curious. If he truly believed Richard killed them and hid the bodies in the tower, why didn't he launch a massive public search? Find the bodies, give them a royal funeral, honor his wife's brothers, and definitively prove Richard's guilt.
He didn't do that.
No. He passed an act of parliament condemning Richard, but didn't focus heavily on the murder. He never instituted a formal inquest. That failure to find the bodies is arguably what allowed the whole pretender problem to arise later.
Pretenders like Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck.
Exactly. And Henry's later actions show he wasn't squeamish about eliminating claimants. Look at Edward Plantagenet, Earl of Warwick.
He was George, Duke of Clarence's son, the prince's cousin, a legitimate Yorkist heir with a arguably better claim than Henry.
Yes. Henry kept him locked up in the Tower for years. Then, in 1499, after Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be the younger prince, was captured, Henry seems to have engineered a situation where Warwick was accused of plotting with Warbeck.
And he executed Warwick.
He did. It was widely seen at the time, and by historians since, as a judicial murder, a politically motivated execution to remove the last credible male Yorkist claimant,
Why then, specifically?
to secure the Spanish marriage again. Ferdinand and Isabella were still hesitant about sending Catherine of Aragon back to England to marry the young Prince Henry while Warwick lived. His execution cleared the final hurdle for that crucial alliance. It shows Henry VII would eliminate rivals when politically necessary.
So Henry VII is a strong contender if the princes survived past 1485. What about other suspects around 1483? What about Buckingham?
Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham. He's an interesting figure. Initially Richard III's biggest supporter, showered with lands and titles after the usurpation. He was made Constable of England.
Which gave him authority.
Significant authority, including access to the Tower and its prisoners. Some theories propose Buckingham might have killed the princes on his own initiative.
Like a will no one rid me of these turbulent priests moment, but for princes, thinking he was doing Richard a favor.
Possibly. Or maybe he was already planning his own rebellion and killed them to create chaos. Or perhaps even clear the way for his own distant claim to the throne. He did have some royal blood.
But he rebelled against Richard just a few months later, in October 1483, and was captured and executed.
Yes, and that's the big counter-argument to Buckingham being the killer. If Buckingham had done it, either with or without Richard's knowledge, why didn't Richard shout it from the rooftops after Buckingham turned traitor?
The traitor Buckingham murdered the princes. That would have been perfect for Richard to clear his own name.
Absolutely. Blame the dead traitor. It would have been politically invaluable. Richard's failure to do so strongly suggests Buckingham wasn't solely responsible, or that Richard knew blaming him wouldn't work, perhaps because Richard himself was implicated. The ultimate responsibility still lay with Richard as king and protector.
Okay, so Buckingham seems less likely as the primary actor, though maybe involved somehow. This brings us back to the possibility that they weren't killed in 1483 at all, the survival theories.
Fueled primarily by the appearance of Perkin Warbeck in the 1490s.
He claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger prince. And he wasn't just some random guy, was he? He got serious international backing.
He absolutely did. Most significantly, from Margaret of Burgundy.
Who was Edward I and Richard III's sister, the prince's aunt?
Exactly. She publicly acknowledged Warbeck as her nephew. He was also supported by Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of France at times, the King of Scots, who even gave him a highborn wife. These weren't minor players. They were major European powers backing his claim against Henry VII.
Does that mean they genuinely believed he was Richard, Duke of York?
It's hard to say for sure. Margaret certainly seemed convinced, or acted convinced. For others, like France or Scotland, backing Warbeck was also a useful political tool to destabilize Henry VII's England. But the level of support he got suggests that genuine doubt about the prince's fate persisted at the highest levels in Europe for years.
Warbeck's campaign lasted quite a while, didn't it?
From about 1491 to 1497, he attempted landings in England and Ireland. Eventually, he was captured by Henry VII.
And what happened then? Did he maintain his claim?
Initially, Henry treated him relatively leniently, but eventually Warbeck confessed to being an impostor, a boatman's son from Tournai named Perkin Warbeck. He read out a public confession. After trying to escape, Henry finally had him executed in 1499, around the same time as the Earl of Warbeck.
So the confession seems to close the book on Warbeck. But what about these recent document finds, the ones claimed by citizen historians to support survival?
Yes, there's been buzz about a few documents promoted by groups trying to clear Richard III's name. One is a receipt from Lille, dated 1487.
1487, that's 2 years after Richard died, during Henry VII's reign. What does it say?
It mentions accounts related to supporting Margaret of Burgundy's nephew, described as the son of King Edward. On the surface, that sounds like proof one prince survived.
There's always a but with this case, isn't there?
There usually is. Historians point out 1487 was the year of the Lambert-Simnel Rebellion. Simnel was another pretender, initially coached to impersonate Richard, Duke of York, before they switched his identity to the Earl of Warwick. So the document could easily refer to Simnel, who was being passed off as Edward's son, or grandson via Clarence, in a confused way.
Or maybe another relative.
Possibly Arthur Plantagenet, Edward V's illegitimate son, who was known to be supported by Margaret. The reference is just too vague to be conclusive proof about the actual Duke of York.
Okay, what about the other main document-generating discussion, the Dutch account?
This one is more elaborate. It's a copy of a text written in Middle Dutch, supposedly a first-person account by Richard, Duke of York, explaining his escape.
An escape story. What does it claim happened?
It alleges that Richard III didn't kill his nephews, but secretly smuggled the younger one, Richard, Duke of York, out of the tower and sent him abroad for safety. The account details his journey and how he was protected by figures like Lord Howard and the Percy family. The end of the narrative conveniently aligns with Perkin Warbeck's known biography.
That sounds almost too perfect. What's the historical take on this?
Deeply skeptical. Firstly, it's a later copy, not an original manuscript. We don't know where the original came from or if one even existed. It conveniently surfaces right when Warbeck needs support.
So, likely propaganda created to bolster Warbeck's claim.
That's the strong consensus. It reads like a justification crafted after the fact. It also contradicts more contemporary accounts, like Mancini's, which clearly imply both boys disappeared together inside the tower and were presumed dead quite early on. The idea Richard III saved one nephew while presumably killing the other or letting him vanish doesn't quite add up psychologically or politically.
So the new documents, while intriguing, don't really shift the balance of evidence dramatically.
Not according to mainstream historical analysis, no. They fit better as pieces of the ongoing political maneuvering and propaganda wars of the late 15th century.
Which leaves us, perhaps inevitably, with the physical evidence, the bones found in the tower.
Yes, the discovery in 1674. This is perhaps the most tangible, yet ultimately frustrating piece of the puzzle. Workmen are demolishing an old staircase in the White Tower.
A staircase leading up to the chapel, I believe.
That's right. And about 10 feet down, they find a wooden chest. Inside, two small human skeletons.
And crucially, the location buried under a staircase matches the initial burial spot described, albeit decades later, in Sir Thomas More's account.
It's an incredibly striking coincidence, if it is a coincidence. It seemed, at the time, to be stunning confirmation of More's narrative. An eyewitness account from 1674 also mentioned finding pieces of rag and velvet with the bones, suggesting clothing of high status.
So King Charles II, who was on the throne then, believed they were the princes.
He did. He concluded these must be the remains of Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, and ordered them to be given a proper burial. They were placed in an urn designed by Sir Christopher Wren and interred in Westminster Abbey in the Henry VII chapel, ironically enough.
Where they remain today. Have they ever been properly examined since?
Yes, once. In 1933, the urn was opened, and the bones were examined by an anatomist and a dental surgeon.
And what did they find? Did the ages match?
Their findings were consistent with the ages of the princes if they died in 1483. They estimated the older child was about 13 years old. Edward V was 12, and the younger was about 11 years old. Richard was 9. They couldn't be definitive, of course, given the science of the time, but it certainly fit.
Okay, so location matches more, ages seem consistent, but we live in the age of DNA. Richard III himself was identified through DNA. Why haven't these bones been tested? It seems like the obvious way to get answers.
The million-dollar question. Despite the precedents set by Richard III's identification, the Church of England, with support from the royal household and the government, has consistently refused permission to exhume the urn and test the bones.
Why? What's the official reasoning? It seems almost deliberately obstructive to some people.
There are several stated reasons, and they're complex. One major concern is precedent. The Dean of Westminster has voiced worries about opening the floodgates if they test the princes. Who's next? Richard II. Other disputed royal remains. They see themselves as custodians of resting places, not subjects of historical investigation on demand.
Okay, the slippery slope argument, fair enough from their perspective, perhaps. What about the scientific arguments?
This is where it gets technical. They argue that even if they did test, the results might not be as conclusive as people hope. Carbon dating, for instance, is apparently not precise enough for this case.
How?
The margin of error for carbon dating is often cited as around plus or minus 50 years. That critical period, 1483-1485, is just too narrow. Dating might confirm they died in the late 15th century, but it couldn't reliably distinguish between death under Richard III, pre-1485, versus death under Henry VII, post-1485.
So carbon dating wouldn't solve the who, even if DNA confirmed identity.
Exactly. DNA could potentially confirm if they are related to Richard III, whose mitochondrial DNA we have, or other known relatives. But establishing identity doesn't establish the date or perpetrator of death.
And there's one more objection they raise, isn't there? Something about, what if they aren't the princes?
Yes, the bogus bones dilemma, as they sometimes put it. What happens if they do the tests, and the DNA proves conclusively these remains are not Edward V and Richard, Duke of York? What does the abbey do then?
They'd have an urn in a place of honor containing unknown children, having believed for 350 years they were the princes.
Precisely. Do they remove them, re-inter them elsewhere, publicly admit the centuries-long misidentification? The authorities feel that disturbing the remains, which have been accepted as the princes since the 17th century, is only justifiable if the science can provide definitive answers to the core historical questions. And they seem unconvinced it currently can, beyond reasonable doubt about identity. They argue it wouldn't necessarily bring us closer to the truth of what happened.
So we're stuck. The potential physical proof remains locked away, untested by modern methods.
For now, yes. It's a frustrating impasse for many historians and researchers.
Okay, so after diving through all this, the politics, the suspect list, the contemporary accounts, the later narratives, the physical evidence stalemate, where does that leave us?
It leaves us, I think, circling back to that central, catastrophic mistake, the disappearance. Regardless of who ordered the killing or when exactly it happened, the decision to make the bodies vanish was the pivot point.
Politically disastrous for Richard III.
Absolutely. It crippled his legitimacy, fueled rebellion, and left him vulnerable. His silence screamed guilt, even if the motive behind the silence, as we discussed, might have been that fear of creating martyrs.
But strategically useful, perhaps, for Henry VII later on.
Very useful. The lingering uncertainty allowed him to control the narrative, justify his own actions against remaining Yorkists, and solidify his dynasty through the marriage to Elizabeth of York, whose claim was strengthened by her brother's presumed deaths. The ambiguity served him well.
It really highlights how a single decision, born perhaps of fear or flawed calculation in 1483, echoed down the centuries.
It does, and it forces us to consider that medieval mindset again, that fear of the sacred, the power of relics and saints cults. It might seem alien to us, but in 1483, the veneration of the saintly Henry VI was a real political force.
So the most compelling explanation for the disappearance itself might not be simple cruelty, but a calculated, if ultimately failed, attempt to neutralize a perceived spiritual and political threat, to deny them a tomb that could become a shrine.
It's a very strong possibility. Richard tried to erase them, to deny them the potent symbolism of innocent martyrdom. But in doing so, he created something else, an enduring mystery, a ghost that has haunted English history ever since.
A ghost we're still grappling with today. It makes you wonder, looking forward, what would it actually take to solve this? Given the DNA stalemate, the problematic texts, what single piece of evidence could finally put this puzzle to rest?
That's the question for you, our listener, to ponder.
Yeah.
Would definitive DNA results from those Westminster bones, if they were ever allowed, be enough? Or would we need a newly discovered, unimpeachable contemporary letter or diary entry? What piece of the puzzle do you think is missing?
Something to think about. That's all the time we have for this deep dive into the enduring mystery of the princes in the tower. Join us next time as we delve into another complex chapter from the past.